The glass towers of the city shimmered in the morning light as a sleek black car stopped at the entrance of the tallest one. From it stepped a woman in a tailored suit, the CEO. Her heels clicked like authority itself as employees scrambled to greet her. At that very moment, a weary single dad hurried through the revolving doors, clutching a janitor's ID badge in one hand and his daughter's tiny fingers in the other. The little girl clung to her worn teddy bear, her eyes wide with wonder at the glittering lobby. The CEO's sharp gaze fell on them, annoyance flickering instantly. But before her father could pull her away, the child tilted her head, studying the powerful woman. Then, with quiet innocence, she leaned forward and whispered something. The CEO's confident stride faltered. Her face turned pale. The entire lobby froze. The janitor's name was Daniel. To the outside world, he was just another face in the crowd, a man in a faded uniform, blending into the background of a city that never slowed down. But behind those tired eyes lived a story of love, loss, and survival. Daniel once dreamed of being a teacher. He had studied hard, married young, and built a simple, happy life with his wife, Clara. Together, they imagined a future full of possibility. But tragedy had rewritten those plans. A car accident had stolen Clara away, leaving Daniel alone to raise their daughter, Emily. She was only 2 years old then, too young to understand why her mother never came home again. Since that day, Daniel's life had been about one thing only: keeping Emily safe. He worked any job he could find, hauling boxes, washing dishes, cleaning offices through sleepless nights. Every paycheck went to rent, food, and the small joys that kept his daughter's childhood alive. A sketchbook, a teddy bear, a second-hand dress that made her smile. Emily, despite the hardships, grew up with a brightness that softened the darkest days. She had her mother's gentle eyes and a habit of asking questions far deeper than her years. "Daddy, do rich people ever get lonely?" Or, "Why do some people smile with their mouths but not their eyes?" Those questions often left Daniel speechless, his heart aching with both pride and worry. And then, in another world entirely, there was Margaret Hale, the CEO. To her employees, she was a legend, a woman who had risen from a modest background to build one of the most powerful corporations in the city. But her climb had been merciless. Every promotion meant a sacrifice, every achievement another wall built between her and the softer parts of life. She had long since stopped believing in family, love, or the warmth of belonging. Her mornings were a routine of luxury cars, glass boardrooms, and numbers on screens that dictated millions. Her office was lined with awards and portraits, but not a single personal photo. People feared her, respected her, but no one truly knew her. To Margaret, vulnerability was weakness, and weakness had no place in her empire. And so, fate placed these two lives side by side. The janitor who had lost everything but love, and the CEO who had gained everything except love. When Daniel walked into that lobby, holding Emily's tiny hand, it was more than just a man starting a job. It was the crossing of two worlds, one defined by humility, sacrifice, and quiet strength, the other by power, pride, and loneliness. And Emily, with her innocent questions and unfiltered heart, would be the bridge neither of them expected. The morning after Daniel's first shift, the CEO entered the lobby as usual, sharp, precise, untouchable. Her eyes caught sight of Emily, sitting quietly on a bench near the janitor's cart, coloring with stubby crayons. The child looked so small against the towering marble columns of the corporate world. Margaret Hale's lips tightened. She approached, heels echoing like thunder in the silent hall. "Why is there a child in my building?" she demanded, her voice clipped, carrying across the polished floor. Daniel, startled, nearly dropped his mop. He rushed forward, bowing his head slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am. I couldn't find childcare today. She won't be a disturbance, I promise." His tone was humble, almost pleading. The CEO's eyes narrowed. Around them, employees had slowed their pace, pretending to check emails while watching the scene unfold. It wasn't every day they saw someone stand in Margaret Hale's spotlight of scrutiny. "She already is a disturbance," Margaret said coldly. This is a place of business, not a daycare. Do your job properly or don't do it at all." Daniel's face burned with shame. He nodded quickly, gently pulling Emily closer. But Emily, in her childlike bravery, looked up at the CEO and tilted her head. "Why are you so angry?" she asked softly. The words cut through the room like glass. Gasps rippled from the nearby staff. Daniel froze, horrified, whispering, "Emily, hush." But the little girl continued, her tone innocent, not defiant. "You look really sad, like you don't have anyone to hug you." The CEO stiffened, her breath catching for just a second only Emily noticed. Her eyes flashed, but not with her usual steel. For the briefest moment, something fragile slipped through. Surprise, even pain. Margaret regained herself instantly. "Teach your daughter manners," she said sharply, turning on her heel and marching toward the elevators. The golden doors closed behind her with a hiss, sealing away the emotion she refused to show. Daniel crouched to Emily's level, his voice trembling. "Sweetheart, you can't talk like that. She's the boss. People like her don't understand." Emily hugged her teddy bear tightly, whispering, "But Daddy," she looked like she wanted to cry. Daniel sighed, torn between pride at his daughter's empathy and fear of what it could cost them. Around them, the whispers of employees lingered. Some pitied him. Others admired the child's courage. But one thing was certain, something about Emily's words had pierced through the CEO's armor, even if she refused to admit it. The collision had begun, the innocent heart of a child against the guarded walls of power, and the cracks were starting to show. The next few days at the company unfolded like an unspoken dance. Daniel tried his best to keep Emily out of sight, tucking her into quiet corners of the building with crayons, a sandwich, or her teddy bear. Yet somehow, the little girl always found her way into the CEO's line of vision. Margaret Hale noticed her more than she wanted to admit. Passing through the lobby, she'd catch Emily's wide eyes following her. During meetings, when she glanced down from the glass balcony into the atrium, she'd see the child humming softly, sketching pictures of flowers on scrap paper. It bothered Margaret, though not in the way she expected. She told herself it was annoyance, disruption of her perfect order. But late at night, alone in her penthouse, her mind returned to the child's words. "You look like you don't have anyone to hug you." The truth was, the child had touched a place she had buried long ago. One afternoon, Margaret strode across the lobby when Emily skipped toward her, clutching a dandelion she had plucked from outside. "Here," Emily said with a shy smile, offering the flower. Margaret froze. Her instinct screamed to reject it, to keep walls high and emotions low. Yet without understanding why, her hand reached out. The tiny, fragile stem rested in her palm. For a second, she felt the softness of childhood, the echo of memories she had silenced. Her own daughter, years ago, running across a garden, holding up the very same kind of flower. She quickly composed herself, slipping the dandelion into her pocket without a word. But the gesture didn't go unnoticed. Employees whispered. Had the Ice Queen just accepted a flower from a janitor's child? Daniel, watching from a distance, felt his heart pound. He had hoped to keep Emily invisible, but instead she was changing the air around her. The encounters continued. One morning, Emily tugged gently at Margaret's sleeve as she passed. "Do you have a daughter?" she asked, her innocent voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. Margaret stopped dead, her throat tightened. No one dared to ask her that, not employees, not friends, not even family. She hadn't spoken of her estranged daughter in years. She turned sharply, eyes blazing to cover the tremor in her heart. "Children should not ask questions they don't understand," she said before striding away. But that night, alone in her office, Margaret unlocked a drawer no one knew existed. Inside were a few fading photographs. A little girl with curly hair, her smile radiant, her arms around a younger Margaret. A life that had slipped away in the bitter storm of divorce, ambition, and stubborn pride. Meanwhile, Daniel's struggles only deepened. He juggled shifts, exhaustion, and bills piling up faster than he could pay. Yet every night, as Emily fell asleep on his shoulder, he whispered promises. "We'll make it, Angel. I'll never let you down." His devotion was unshakable, his sacrifices invisible to the world. The contrast was sharp. A man with nothing but love for his daughter, and a woman with everything except love in her life. And still, something invisible kept pulling Margaret closer to the child she tried so hard to ignore. Emily's innocence was unraveling her defenses thread by thread. What neither of them knew, the moment that would shatter Margaret's carefully constructed world, was coming sooner than they imagined. It was a Friday evening. Most employees had already rushed out, eager for their weekend escapes. The vast marble lobby of Hale Industries stood nearly empty, echoing with the faint hum of cleaning machines. Daniel was on overtime, mopping the endless floor, while Emily sat on a bench nearby, sketching in her notebook. The little girl's feet swung back and forth, her teddy bear perched beside her like a quiet companion. Margaret Hale emerged from the elevator, her heels striking the floor like a metronome. She had just come from a grueling meeting, her mind filled with numbers and strategies. Her expression was carved in stone, unreadable, untouchable. But as she passed the lobby, her gaze drifted unwillingly toward the child. Emily looked up. Their eyes met, and for reasons Margaret couldn't explain, she slowed her stride. Emily studied her with innocent curiosity. Then, with the bravery only children possess, she slid off the bench and walked toward the CEO. Daniel looked up, alarm flooding his face. "Emily," he called, but it was too late. His daughter was already standing in front of Margaret Hale, her tiny hands clutching her notebook. "Excuse me," Emily said softly, tilting her head. "Can I tell you a secret?" The CEO frowned, startled. Employees never approached her this way. Strangers never dared to, and yet here was this little girl speaking as if they were equals. Margaret opened her mouth to dismiss her, but something in the child's earnest eyes stopped her. Slowly, she bent down just enough to hear. Emily leaned closer, cupping her small hands around Margaret's ear. She whispered only a few words. And in that instant, the world seemed to tilt. Margaret's face drained of color. Her usual steel mask cracked, replaced by shock, raw, unguarded, undeniable. For a heartbeat, she looked like a completely different woman. Daniel hurried over, panic etched across his face. He scooped Emily into his arms. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. She didn't mean any harm. She just talks too much sometimes." His voice trembled with both fear and shame. But Margaret didn't answer. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. The whispered words reverberated in her mind, colliding with memories she had locked away. Without a word, she turned sharply and strode back toward the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting her off from their gaze. Inside her office minutes later, she sat at her desk, trembling. Her hand reached instinctively for the locked drawer. She opened it and pulled out the faded photograph of her own daughter, years younger, smiling in the sun. The words Emily had whispered were the same ones her daughter used to say before bed every night. Margaret clutched the photo, her composure unraveling. Tears pricked her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed in decades. Meanwhile, Daniel held Emily close, confused but protective. "What did you say to her, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Emily hugged her teddy bear tightly, whispering back, "I just told her the truth." Daniel frowned, unsettled. What truth? But Emily only gave him a small, knowing smile, as if the secret wasn't meant for him. The wheels of fate had been set in motion. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, his daughter's whisper had pierced through a fortress of stone, opening a wound that could no longer be ignored. Margaret Hale sat alone in her corner office, the city skyline glittering like a jeweled crown beyond the glass walls. Normally, this view gave her a sense of control, proof that she had conquered everything she once dreamed of. Tonight, it mocked her. Her hands shook as she held the faded photograph. A little girl with curly hair sat on her lap in the picture, both of them smiling, sunlight spilling across their faces. That was nearly 20 years ago, before the divorce, before the endless court battles, before her ex-husband poisoned her daughter's heart against her. Her daughter's name was Lily. The memory burned. She had buried it so deep, convincing herself that ambition was enough, that power could fill the silence left behind. She had built walls so high that even the thought of Lily couldn't break through, until now. Because Emily, the janitor's little girl, had whispered words only Lily used to say. "You look like the mommy in my dreams." Margaret pressed the photo against her chest, her composure cracking for the first time in years. How could this child, a stranger, know those exact words? The same ones Lily had whispered during bedtime stories, long before everything fell apart. The next day, she couldn't stop herself. She lingered near the lobby, observing from a distance as Daniel mopped floors and Emily colored. She studied the way Emily's small hand slipped naturally into her father's. She listened as Emily asked him questions in her sweet, thoughtful voice. "Daddy, do you think mommies ever miss their children in heaven?" Daniel paused, his face tightening, but he knelt and kissed her forehead. "I think they miss them very much, Angel, just like we miss them." Margaret felt her throat close. The child wasn't just sweet, she was a mirror, reflecting every ache Margaret had buried, every failure she pretended didn't exist. By midweek, she had started making excuses to pass through the lobby more often. Each time, she found her eyes drawn to Emily. One afternoon, she overheard the girl giggle as she showed Daniel a crayon drawing. It was a picture of three figures: a tall man, a little girl, and a woman with sharp eyes but a soft smile. "That's us, Daddy," Emily explained proudly. "And that's her." She pointed to the woman in the sketch. "The lady in the fancy shoes, I think she's supposed to be with us." Margaret turned away quickly, her chest tightening. She locked herself in her office and sat in silence for hours. That night, in the solitude of her penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink. She stared at the city lights, lost in thought. For the first time in years, she admitted it to herself. She was lonely. Achievements lined her shelves, but her heart was empty. And she couldn't stop seeing Emily's face. The whisper, the flower, the drawing, all of it was awakening something Margaret thought was dead. Regret, longing, and above all, a question: had she chosen wrong? The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. She saw Daniel wiping down the glass doors, his movements tired but steady. Emily sat nearby, humming as she braided her teddy bear's scarf. Margaret hesitated, then walked over. For the first time, she didn't address Daniel with orders. Instead, her voice was softer, almost reluctant. "How old is she?" Daniel looked up surprised. "Emily, she just turned 7. Margaret nodded slowly. 7. The same age Lily had been when Margaret last heard her call her mommy. Something inside her cracked open completely. She excused herself and retreated to her office. But this time, instead of hiding from the pain, she faced it. She pulled out pen and paper, her hands trembling, and began writing a letter. Not to Emily, not to Daniel, but to Lily. For the first time in decades, Margaret admitted the truth on paper. Her mistakes, her pride, her regrets, and the ache of losing her daughter. Tears stained the page as she wrote. Emily's whispered secret had done what no boardroom victory or million-dollar deal could ever do. It had made her remember she was a mother, and that she had once been loved unconditionally. The fortress was crumbling, and for Margaret Hale, there was no going back. The following week, something unexpected happened. Daniel was called into the CEO's office. He entered nervously, his cap in hand, expecting reprimand or even dismissal. The grand glass desk, the leather chairs, the towering bookshelves, everything about the office screamed power. But Margaret Hale was not the same woman who had once cut him down with her words. She sat quietly, fingers interlaced, her expression softer, almost uncertain. "Sit down, Mr. Collins," she said. Her voice still carried authority, but there was a gentleness threaded through it now. Daniel sat on the edge of the chair, heart pounding. "Ma'am, if this is about Emily..." "It is," she interrupted. Then, after a pause, "Tell me about her." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He had prepared apologies, not conversations. "Emily," he smiled faintly, the first smile he'd allowed himself in days. "She's everything. She loves to draw. She asks questions that make me feel like the student, not the teacher. She misses her mother every day, though she was too young to remember her properly. And his voice broke slightly. She's the reason I keep going." For the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw something flicker across the CEO's face. Sorrow. Margaret's eyes drifted to the window. "She's remarkable," she murmured. "Children, they see what adults work so hard to hide." At that moment, the door creaked open. Emily stepped in, clutching her teddy bear. "Daddy, are you done?" she asked timidly. Daniel rose to usher her out, mortified. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't." But Margaret lifted a hand. "It's all right, let her stay." Emily looked between them, then walked straight to the CEO. From her sketchbook, she pulled out another crayon drawing and placed it on Margaret's desk. It showed 3 figures again, Emily, Daniel, and Margaret, holding hands under a bright sun. Margaret's composure shattered. She pressed her lips together, fighting the wave of emotion. "Emily," she whispered, "why did you draw me here with you?" Emily's answer was simple, spoken with the same innocence as the first day. "Because you belong with us. You look like the mommy in my dreams." The words echoed in the vast office, settling into the silence like a revelation. Daniel froze, his jaw tightening as he finally understood what his daughter had whispered that night in the lobby. His eyes flicked to Margaret, and for the first time, he saw not a powerful CEO, but a woman trembling under the weight of memory. Margaret's hands trembled as she touched the drawing. The little girl's words had reopened wounds she had buried for decades, but also lit a spark she thought was gone forever. She leaned forward, her voice cracking. "Emily, you remind me of someone I lost a long time ago, someone I loved more than anything." Emily tilted her head, her innocent eyes wide. "Maybe that's why I dreamed about you." Daniel swallowed hard, torn between confusion, fear, and awe. He had expected anger, dismissal, not vulnerability. Not this. For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavy but alive. Then Margaret exhaled, almost a confession. "Your daughter, she has given me something I didn't think I deserved anymore. A second chance to feel." The walls she had built for decades were finally crumbling. And in that moment, both Daniel and Emily saw the truth. The CEO was no longer just a powerful woman in a glass tower. She was a broken mother, longing for redemption. The whisper was no longer a mystery. It was a seed of change, and it had taken root. The office lights dimmed as the night sky pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The once bustling building now hummed quietly, with only a handful of employees working late. The CEO sat alone in her corner office, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. For the first time in years, she didn't see power or control. She saw exhaustion and something else, loneliness. Her mind replayed the moment in the lobby. The little girl's innocent voice cut deeper than any business rival ever could. "Why are you so sad?" Sad, no one had ever dared use that word for her. She was called ambitious, ruthless, brilliant, but never sad. Yet when the girl said it, she felt the truth of it in her chest. She turned her chair to face the city skyline. Skyscrapers stood tall, just like her own achievements, yet they seemed hollow, cold, empty. She thought about her mansion with its endless rooms, each furnished with perfection but filled with silence. She thought about dinners eaten alone, victories celebrated in solitude, birthdays she never remembered because she was too busy signing contracts. A sudden ache gripped her heart. For years she had convinced herself that wealth was enough, that power would protect her from pain. But that child's words had cracked something open inside. For the first time, she admitted it. She was unhappy. The knock on her door startled her. It was the janitor. He looked surprised to see her still there, but his little daughter peeked shyly from behind his leg. She carried her teddy bear, hugging it tight. Before she could stop herself, the CEO spoke softly. "You were right," she said, her voice trembling. "I am sad." The janitor blinked, unsure how to respond. His daughter walked in without hesitation, her small steps echoing in the vast office. She placed her teddy bear gently on the CEO's desk. "Here, he helps me when I feel sad. Maybe he can help you too." The CEO's lips quivered. No assistant, no executive, no board member had ever offered her such simple kindness. She picked up the worn toy and held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, the woman who had built an empire allowed herself to cry. And in that quiet, vulnerable moment, the CEO realized the truth she had run from all her life. Success meant nothing without love, connection, and humanity. The gala had reached its peak. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the hall as music swelled, champagne flowed, and laughter echoed. Every corner buzzed with chatter about the company's triumphs and the CEO's brilliance. She stood at the center, dazzling in her evening gown, smiling as cameras flashed and powerful men shook her hand. But inside her chest, a storm raged. Her smile was flawless, but her pulse raced wildly. The little girl's words from that morning repeated like a haunting melody. "Do you have a daddy too?" No investor's compliment could drown it out, no spotlight could blind it. Her mind slipped to memories she had buried, being a child herself, standing in a dim hallway, waiting for a father who never returned. She had sworn back then never to be weak, never to need anyone. Now, standing on the pinnacle of success, she felt more fragile than ever. Her eyes darted across the room until they landed on him, the janitor. He stood quietly near the back in his simple uniform, holding a tray to help servers. His daughter sat beside him, her teddy bear perched on her lap, smiling with the kind of innocence money could never buy. The CEO's throat tightened. For a brief moment, she envied them, their closeness, their unshakable bond. A janitor and his little girl looked richer than her entire empire. Suddenly, applause erupted. A board member raised a toast in her honor. "To the most powerful woman in the city," glasses clinked. The spotlight swung to her, and all eyes expected her signature speech of dominance and victory. But as she stepped onto the stage, her legs trembled. The microphone waited, but her voice caught in her throat. She gripped the podium, knuckles white. The glamorous crowd leaned forward, expecting brilliance. Instead, silence thickened. Her vision blurred, faces blended into a haze. The champagne glass in her hand slipped, shattering on the marble floor. Gasps rippled across the hall. And then it happened. Her carefully constructed mask cracked. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down her face. The mighty CEO, the woman known for never bending, never breaking, collapsed to her knees before the stunned audience. Whispers turned to stunned silence. For once, no one dared laugh. At the back of the hall, the janitor clutched his daughter's hand tighter. His heart ached at the sight, but his little girl's innocent voice rose above the silence. "Daddy, why is she crying?" The words cut through the golden hall like a blade, piercing the heart of every onlooker. The CEO's sobs deepened, raw and human, as though decades of pain had finally erupted in one moment. The woman who had everything was crumbling, and for the first time, the world saw her not as a queen of glass towers, but as a lonely soul who desperately needed saving. The morning sun rose over the towering skyscrapers, painting the glass and steel in golden hues. Inside the corporate headquarters, however, the air was far from calm. News had already begun to leak. Someone from the late-night scientific team had whispered the story to a journalist, how an old janitor had done the impossible. By dawn, it had exploded across online platforms. "Untrained janitor cracks equation scientists failed for years," read the headlines flashing across screens worldwide. At first, many dismissed it as fake news, a sensationalized rumor designed to grab clicks. But when the CEO's own company released a short statement confirming that a solution had indeed been found, though not yet revealing who had found it, the story took on a life of its own. By mid-morning, the press camped outside the building, microphones and cameras ready. Security struggled to manage the crowd as reporters shouted over each other. Is it true the janitor solved the unsolvable? Will the company release his identity? Does this mean decades of scientific work were beaten by a man with no formal degree? Inside, the CEO sat in her glass-walled office, pale and restless. Her empire, her pride, and her public image were now in jeopardy. She had always projected herself as a symbol of innovation, of brilliance leading brilliance. And yet, if the truth got out, the world would learn that her arrogance had blinded her, that a man she had mocked, a janitor with a mop and bucket, had succeeded where her team of elite scientists had failed. The confrontation. In the research lab below, the janitor sat quietly in a corner chair, clutching his cap nervously in his hands. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Overnight, he hadn't slept. The calls, the noise, the rumors had kept him awake. Scientists moved around him in awe, some still glancing at the chalkboard covered with his neat solution, shaking their heads as if still trying to convince themselves it was real. The CEO stormed into the lab, heels striking the floor like gunshots. The room fell silent. She approached him, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, disbelief, and something she rarely felt: fear. "You," she hissed quietly, leaning down to his level, "do you realize what you've done?" The janitor looked up, calm but weary. "I did what was asked," he said softly. "I just solved the problem." Her jaw tightened. "You've humiliated me, my scientists, my company." But before she could continue, one of her senior researchers stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, he hasn't humiliated us. He's shown us what we couldn't see. His method is elegant, brilliant. It's something only a fresh perspective could have achieved." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The CEO's glare hardened, but she knew she couldn't suppress this truth much longer. The press conference. By afternoon, the company announced a press conference. The world watched live streams in anticipation. Rows of reporters filled the hall, cameras pointed at the stage where the CEO stood at the podium. Behind her, projected on a massive screen, was the solved equation, its chalk-drawn symbols immortalized as a piece of history. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we confirm something extraordinary, an equation thought to be unsolvable, one that has eluded the brightest scientific minds, has finally been solved." A wave of applause and gasps spread through the room. "But the solution," she continued, pausing dramatically, "did not come from one of our scientists. It came from—" She hesitated, fighting every instinct to keep control of the narrative. "A member of our staff, a man whose brilliance had been overlooked, a man who, though holding no official scientific title, achieved what the world thought impossible." The janitor was led on stage, shy and overwhelmed by the blinding lights. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. He looked out nervously at the sea of cameras. "Sir," a reporter shouted immediately, "how did you do it? What's your background?" He adjusted his cap, voice humble. "I studied mathematics when I was younger, but life didn't allow me to finish. I took this job to survive, not to be recognized, but numbers never left me. They've always been my language." The crowd went silent, touched. Another reporter asked, "What does this mean for the future of science?" He thought for a moment, then said, "It means genius can come from anywhere. Sometimes the answers don't lie in privilege or prestige. They lie in passion, persistence, and perspective." The hall erupted in applause, reporters rising to their feet. The CEO's fall. In the following days, the janitor's story spread like wildfire. Universities invited him to lecture, scientists reached out to collaborate, and foundations offered him grants to continue his work. People across the world celebrated him as proof that talent knows no boundaries. The CEO, however, faced a different fate. Videos of her mocking him circulated online, painting her as arrogant and cruel. Memes flooded social media, comparing her scornful laughter to her reluctant praise at the press conference. Investors questioned her judgment, and her board of directors pressured her to step down. She had built her empire on the image of leadership and vision, but one act of arrogance had shattered it. Within weeks, she quietly resigned, retreating from the spotlight. The janitor's legacy. The janitor, once invisible, became a symbol of hope. He wasn't interested in wealth or fame, though offers came in abundance. Instead, he chose to dedicate himself to education. With the money he received from speaking engagements and research collaborations, he funded scholarships for underprivileged students who loved science and math but lacked opportunities. "I know what it's like," he told an interviewer one evening. "To be overlooked, to be told you don't belong. No one should lose their chance because of circumstance." His story inspired millions. Teachers used it in classrooms to remind students that intelligence isn't defined by degrees or titles. Companies began to rethink their hierarchies, considering the hidden talents of workers at every level. Years later, when asked how he wanted to be remembered, he smiled gently and said, "Not as a genius, just as a man who never stopped seeing beauty in numbers, even when the world stopped seeing me." The video fades out with a cinematic shot. The chalkboard with the solved equation, the room empty now, sunlight streaming through tall windows. The camera pans slowly to the janitor's old mop and bucket leaning against the wall, silent reminders of the life he once lived, now forever changed. A voiceover closes the story. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from those with titles and recognition, but from those who see the world differently. Never underestimate quiet brilliance. It may just change the world.